Welcome to the very first video of the course where we are learning about software as a service field. Now I think for the very first video it is proper to learn about the origin of software as a service field, as it is not that far back into the history when this whole field was created. So let's go for that. When we think about the internet sector, most of us imagine that this is some sort of a universe of endless possibilities for various businesses that these businesses can exploit. Now, it has been true that since 1990s, this internet as a phenomena has had an enormous impact on many aspects of a business culture, such as, for instance, near instant communication. So you see this huge phenomena that has been occurring, but the story is not that straightforward. There has been a huge downside of the whole internet sector and internet industry that occurred in early 2000s, and it was called the dot-com era. Long story short, there are many reasons why dot-com era occurred and many implications of it. However, what is important is that it was an industry-wide crisis, and this crisis could be maybe the best classified as the crisis of trust. Yes, that's right. Many IT vendors has created this sort of a bubble of overinvestment and the whole industry was hitting too much. And when the bubble burst, the whole industry faced this dot-com era crisis. Now, what it meant is that investors were all of a sudden not that willing to invest their money and their capital into the new companies. And so what was needed is that IT vendors needed to regain the trust of the investors and maybe of other parties who are involved in the market. So IT vendors needed to come up with a new business model that can regain this trust and regain the interest of investors. And this is the point when we are getting to so-called cloud computing. I mean, if we would go back to the early 2000s, cloud computing was already around for a few years. But this was the right time when IT vendors believed that cloud computing can be this technological model that can get them out of the crisis and that can regain the trust of the investors. So let's look at the definition of the cloud computing to understand it more. Cloud computing is computing in which large groups of remote servers are networked to allow the centralized data storage and online access to computer services or resources. Now you see, this was the revolution in the whole industry. So now all of the resources went, not all of them of course, but the mainstream of resources were invested into this one technological trend. And now you see, when you have this technological trend, it usually works the way that the business will catch up. And so when you have a cloud computing as a technology, the business that was built around it, or one of the businesses that was built around it, was called the software as a service. And this is where our story starts. And the story of ours starts with one single person called Mark Benioff. Mark Benioff had created what we consider a very first software as a service company called Salesforce, and probably you have already heard about them. Nowadays, it's a huge company that is focusing mainly on sales automation software. And this was also his initial idea to create a sales automation software. Because when he looked outside in the world, he has seen thousands of companies that need a sales automation software. Now, this demand has been at that time fulfilled by the IT vendors, but in a little bit strange way where he has seen a lot of potential for improvement. Let's say that you have 5 companies. Each of them needs sales automation software. Now, the solution that was available back then was that each of these companies will hire an IT vendor who will create a custom-made solution for them, and let's say each of these companies will now pay $1,000 for the sales automation software. Now his idea was different. Why wouldn't we create one great piece of a software, one great product that can serve all of these 5 companies? And that's what he made. That was the first software as a service product. And now when it comes to pricing, think about how much of our resources can be saved. Instead of charging these companies $1,000 or some huge amount of money, he charged them very little every month. And we are going to go into this deeper later, but imagine that instead of charging $1,000, you will charge them $10 every month. And so this whole business idea of software as a service has been created back then when Mark Benioff had an idea of sales automation software that can be as a standardized product delivered to a lot of customers at the same time. Okay, so we see how this field was born thanks to Mark Benioff and Salesforce some 15 years ago. But now let's think about the growth of this field and this whole industry. Who is creating these products in the past 15 years? Well, we observe two streams or two ways how these products are created. First of which are large corporates or these big IT vendors who have been around for a long time. Because if you imagine the situation, the Salesforce and Mark Benioff, it was just a small startup company, but it was spreading around very quickly. But the market has been occupied by these huge IT vendors. Now these huge IT vendors have always the possibility to react to this new emerging trend. And so they can try to create their own SaaS products. Now the truth is that it is not so simple for them. There are many reasons why the IT vendors who have originally been building this custom-made software are not really maybe willing to change into an SaaS product. Because imagine it's a huge change in the corporate culture, in the management, in the product development. Very often for corporates, it's a big change to reshift their focus into SaaS vendors. So it doesn't work very well here, but still we see some products coming from large corporates. Now there is the other stream which is really pushing the industry forward, and those are the startup companies. Probably all of you have already heard the word startup, but let's look at the definition one more time. Startup is a human institution that is operating under conditions of extreme uncertainty in order to produce a cutting-edge technology. And this definition has two important parts. First part, they are operating under conditions of extreme uncertainty. These startup companies are very different from the previously mentioned corporates because they are lacking mostly two things, and that is money and time. So you see, the culture in these startup companies is going to be very different due to this. And the second important part of the sentence is that they are producing cutting edge technology. And software as a service is in the past 15 years an exact sample of a cutting edge technology. So what to conclude is that the market is mostly relying on these startup companies to produce a software as a service product. Let's then conclude this video. We have seen the whole origin of software as a service industry. It was back in the 2000s when the dot-com era occurred and IT vendors needed some new model to regain the trust and regain the interest from the investors. That was the time when Mark Benioff and Salesforce came into play and developed their first sales automation software. Since then, the market is relying mostly on startup companies to produce this cutting-edge technology, mostly under the conditions of extreme uncertainty. So that's all about the origins of software as a service, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next videos.